you very much, and I really appreciate not only how you center us on where the heritage of a godly family springs from, what that source is, but also giving us the hope, no matter where we come from or where we are as individuals or in our families now, that with the centering of Christ in our family, we can be tapped into that heritage. We are the family of God together. And so thank you for sharing that. Ryan, you've served as a family pastor for years, and you've walked with families that are seeking to do that. You've walked with families who are experiencing the devastation and destruction that comes from the breakdown of family, but you've also brought restoration, renewal through your ministry and your leadership. Can you let us know a little bit, what's it like for the average family right now in our city? Not the average family. What are issues families are facing? What are some challenges? And how can we as Christian leaders empower and encourage restoration and renewal of families?
Yeah. One of the things I think that a lot of, especially young families, struggle with is this picture-perfect mentality. The old adage was, you go to a store, you get a picture frame, and in that picture frame, there's this beautiful-looking family. And you look at this family, and you're like, wow, I want to be that family, right? But we don't know the story behind that family. We may not realize that dad has an addiction to porn, or that there's no intimacy in their marriage. We don't know the story behind it. Now it's we see families on Instagram, right? Mm-hmm. We see families that are taking yoga pictures with the sunrise and the mountain and all that. And we're like, man, we want to be like that. But we just have to be who God designed us to be. Amen. And not strive for something that is unattainable, which is perfection, right? That's unattainable, but that's what we strive for. And I think we just have to help families and couples know that it's okay to be imperfect, because we have a God that's bigger than that. Right? We have to realize that we are all broken. All families are broken. All marriages have brokenness, but we have a God that is bigger than our brokenness. And so, for us, we as the church, I think, have to be really careful that we don't try to take the role of parent. Because we have to understand that parent is the most influential voice in the life of a child or a student. But we also have to understand that they're not the only voice. And so we, not just we as the church, but everyone, have the opportunity to be an example for kids and students. And I think that is what is missing in a lot of churches, in a lot of communities, a lot of cities. Where kids and students are not being surrounded by godly examples, by godly marriages. Mm-hmm. Man, if you want to go after the next generation, go after marriages.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate how you, on the one hand, address the misperception that the images we see are actual reality, that there are no perfect families, and that we've got to be honest. But you also represent and point us to what we've heard again and again. That would be Gilbert's language of God trying to get our attention, not yelling but repeating. And that is the opportunity for kids and children that don't have models, that the church, that we can go and be that model. That's one thing, Robert, that's close to your heart. I know I've heard you say, let me get this right, we work hard to be better leaders, and we need more of an emphasis on marriage. The next generations are counting on us. Talk to us about our marriages and families as Christian leaders, but really the church and in our city, being a witness, showing to a world what it looks like to have a generation that understands the mystery and the glory that can come from marriage. Why is it a model to the world, and how can it be used to reshape and bring transformation to our city?
That's like a huge question.
You got 2 minutes.
2 minutes. I have the privilege of working in the business community and working with business owners, and there is a tendency that I see that this poser type, I'm going to earn this, I'm going to do whatever it is I'm going to do, and look at us, we have this picture-perfect family. And the reality of it is that it's messy. It's a beautiful mess, but it's messy. Anybody here who would say that they don't have that their marriage is absolutely perfect. Please, I'd really like to be able to visit with you. Mine's messy, I'm going to just admit that. But it's in the struggle that we get to model to others how we got to the other side. Because we are in a disposable society right now. Oh, it didn't work out, I was really struggling, now I'm going to commiserate with my friends about my miserable marriage, and I'm not going to really work on it, and what am I going to go do? I'm ultimately going to get a divorce. So in the 60s, 88% of children under the age of 18 lived in a family with two parents. Today, it's 69%. That's a 20-point drop. All right? But here's the crazy part. It's diluted even more because that two parents has now made up a lot of blended families. Right? Mm-hmm. Single moms went from 8% to 24%. That's 300%. Single dads, 1% to 4%. That's a 400% fold. Small number, but it's a big fold. Right? So there's a problem that we happen to have here. And we know all the other statistics about marriage and what's going on and how our society is sliding and what that looks like. And what is a Christ-centered biblical marriage look like? It's getting more and more diluted. And so if these leaders, you're a leader, by the way, if you don't think that you are, you are. If you're not modeling it in some way, bringing an appropriate amount of mess in to say, I'm struggling here, where are you struggling? Mm-hmm. How do you fix it? It takes a village, does it not? Mm-hmm. Let me show you how to get on the other side of that. And then tell the God story on the other side. To sit with an employee or a team member and say, let's pray through that. Let's find out what God says about that. Let's go learn something. Why is it that we believe that we know how to love? It's in our DNA, this is true, but it got jacked up right around Genesis 3. Right? It's been falling ever since then. We really don't know. I don't think really know how to love because God says, I have a new commandment for you. Love one another as I have loved you. And that means that there is a demonstrable, visible way of doing this. And we don't do that very well. We follow the slide of the world. It's worldly love. What does it mean to love? Christina was saying, I smile. This simple connectedness with another human being. And so I think that it's really important that we model this in some way. In the messiness, quit being a poser, and try to be as righteous and godly as we can. And work through that because we get to model to this new generation, this disposable, and say, it's worth it. Mm-hmm. It's worth it. And then maybe their children, we'll all be able to say, well, maybe we can all start a new generation where he's looking backwards. Can we look forwards and make a change?
Thank you. That's a powerful picture. And I would like for all of y'all to speak to this question that I have for Carl. Carl, I want you to lead. I mean, if we're talking about a basic, fundamental building block of our society that is messy, and we've really got to be honest with our mess and move towards loving one another and strengthening a core relationship of marriage and family, what role does having a strong city have in relationship to having strong families? Carl?
Oh, wow. That wasn't in my notes, so I'm going to address that a little different.
I tried to summarize the question.
Yeah. Well, but I'm glad you shared that, because what's really interesting is that strong families create strong communities, and strong communities create a strong country. And I'm going to take you to a place that might surprise you. I want to go all the way back to our founding fathers, because let's talk about democracy and what makes democracy work. And I should have written this down, maybe I'll get this, but John Adams said this. So Jefferson was the hand of the Constitution, right? But John Adams was the mind of the Constitution. He was a fiery creature, and he was always arguing, but he was the thought leader of our Constitution. But he said something that would probably surprise you. He said, our Constitution was created for a moral and religious people and is wholly inadequate for the governance of any other. Does that surprise you? The thinker of our Constitution, that the Constitution was created for a moral and religious people and is wholly inadequate for the governance of any other. He said that because our founding fathers had this Holy Spirit-inspired understanding of human nature. And this is what they knew from a democracy standpoint. You can only govern people if they're governable, right? What makes people governable? People are governable if they have strong values, strong virtues, and a strong vision for their life. Where does that come from? That comes from families. All of those things are rooted in families, because when you understand, when you read the social science of how values are transmitted generationally, social scientists say that values are transmitted along lines of affection. Isn't that an interesting term? Along lines of affection. The people that love you and care about you are you're important in their life, they can transmit their values to you. So family is so important from that standpoint. But I want us to take us back into the 1830s, because the breakdown of our family had its roots in the 1830s. Think about this. In the 1830s, 90% of dads were stay-at-home fathers. Why was that?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody worked on a farm.
Mm-hmm.
And then something happened.
Mm-hmm.
The industrial age came. And for the first time ever, dads began to say, you know what, maybe we should move into town. And all over the Midwest, men were moving to Chicago, actually. And for the first time ever, our families began to get a little more fractured. And it took us all the way into the late 1800s, which took us to what was called the Progressive Era. And the Progressive Era was a time of what they called fierce discontent, especially in women. Women were really angry in the 1890s. And we had a divorce epidemic that hit our country, where divorces quadrupled in 10 years. The reason why I bring this history up is because I think we've forgotten where the root of all of our problems are. Social problems persist, and what we think about the problem is wrong. And this is what I find when I talk to leaders. Am I okay on time?
You're going on and on. Keep going, brother.
But when you
this is
talk
impressive without notes.
I love asking leaders this question. I say, what do you see are the problems in our community? And leaders always give me analytical answers. They give me these siloed analytical answers. Well, it's dropout, it's teenage pregnancy, it's poor academic performance. They give me analytical answers, and when you think analytically, then you come back with analytical solutions. But what if we thought holistically and said, well, wait a minute. What if all of these problems truly had their root in the breakdown of the family? Then what's the solution? That's why we're proposing this idea called Decade of the Family. I loved this idea of Decade of the Family, because family is an aspirational thing, right? It's something that we all aspire to be a part of. We know what family feels like. But I love the thing about family also because it brings us all together. You know, we've tried to get people together before, but people say, well, I like what you're doing, but I'm working on the poverty thing, or I'm working on the teenage pregnancy thing. But we're all working on the family thing, right? Mm-hmm. And it brings us together. And here's another really interesting fact about our city that we just discovered. We subscribe to this powerful data service called Glue. And Glue takes big data. In other words, they're watching everything you read. You notice that? Mm-hmm. You know, they got big data on everything that you're doing. And then they use artificial intelligence to get at the root of that big data to determine what are our motivations, what motivates us as a community. Well, so we started mapping different parts of our city, particularly for churches, and say, well, what are the primary motivations in this part of the city, in this part of the city, in this part of the city? And they were pretty much, yeah, that makes sense, that makes sense. And then after we were about halfway through I went, wait a minute, there's something going on. Go back to everything we just learned, and what we found was that the chief number one motivator of our behavior all across San Antonio is rooted in family. Interesting. We are a family-motivated community. And I reached out to the data provider and I said, you know, is this common? Do we see this in other cities? And they said, absolutely not. Nowhere else in Texas, in fact. San Antonio is a uniquely family-motivated city. So we're excited about this idea of family and the way that it brings us together so that we can all work on something together, because that's the purpose of collaboration, right?
That's right.
Shared purpose.
Shared purpose. Right. Thank you, Carl. Gentlemen, what would y'all add to this idea that city transformation can come when we go holistically to the root of the problem, and that is bringing restoration, renewal, and hope to families?
where my mind goes is that we've got work to do. And to personalize it. Personalize it. Make it, what is it that is in your life that is about you, not about your spouse, not about your kids, not about those, what is it that is about you? Go learn what that is. Let God do his good works in you, and then go spread that. And so don't let the world shape you, let his word shape you. And I'm going to assume here everybody here goes to church. So if that's the case, then most likely your church has Right Now Media, because just about every church is in Right Now Media. If you've got that, we'll go use the resources, go read a book, go to. You spend so much time learning about how to be a great leader. What if we were to spend a disproportionate amount of time on how to be a great spouse or a great parent? We just assume that we know how to do it because this is what we were taught, and we go down the little road. So my encouragement and challenge to you would go learn one little thing and just keep that ball rolling, be a lifelong learner.
Thank you, Robert. Just let me reinforce that. We talk about city transformation. Where does that begin? Right here in my heart. That we're transformed by the gospel, and that we're concerned about being more godly men and women and working out from there. That's integrity. That's powerful. Thank you. Cory?
Just one final thought. My mentor, John Hanna, is sitting in the room, and he said to me, you know, his whole trajectory changed when he understood who the enemy was. And the enemy, of course, is us. And so when we do focus on ourselves, we're able to understand the power of the Holy Spirit that moves through us. And that is where change comes from. Our culture has told us that this battle is over, that family is over. That's not true. That is not true, because we know that the answers exist, and you can be 100% successful with Jesus at the center of your relationships, and you walking that out.
Cory, thank you very much. You were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think if we want to affect change in the next generation, then we have to be ourselves willing and open to change in our own lives. We have to be willing to allow God to perform a transformation or a restoration in our own hearts. If we want to affect change in the lives of kids and students, if we ourselves are willing to change our habits, then how can we ever expect our kids and students to change their habits, right? If we want them not to be on their phones and social media and all of that all the time, then we have to start by setting that example for them. So I think, and then as leaders, we have to promote that message to those that we have leadership over, parents and marriages and whoever that is, of just saying, you know what, God is an amazing and awesome God. And if the goal in mind is to have your kids and students have an incredible relationship with God, then what are you doing right now to help them reach that goal? So.
Thank you very much. Carl, one final thought. I need you here. Help us to see, as we put this together, Gilbert's getting ready to come up here and close us, but talk about the downstream effects that can happen.